My brother texted me at 2 a.m. Emergency. Need $7,000 for rent or we're homeless. I immediately sent it. 2 days later, I saw his Instagram story from Vegas with the caption, "High Roller Weekend." I screenshot everything, sent it to his landlord with a note. Thought you should know where your rent money went. He was evicted the same week. I, 34 am, was dead asleep when my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. My brother's name flashed on the screen with a message that made my stomach drop. He needed $7,000 immediately, or his family would be homeless by Friday. His landlord was threatening eviction, and he had exhausted every other option. The desperation in his text was palpable, describing how his wife was crying and their 2 young kids didn't understand why mommy and daddy were so upset. I didn't hesitate. Despite our complicated history, he was family. I transferred the money within minutes, draining most of my emergency fund that I had been building for 3 years. When I told him it was done, he responded with grateful messages about how I had saved his family and how he would never forget this. He promised to pay me back within 2 months, claiming he had a big project coming through at work. The next morning, I felt good about my decision. Sure, $7,000 was a massive hit to my savings, but keeping his kids housed was worth it. I had always been the responsible one between us, working steady jobs while he bounced between get-rich-quick schemes and questionable business ventures. This felt like the moment he finally needed his big brother to come through. Wednesday passed normally. I worked my usual shift at the engineering firm, grabbed dinner with a colleague, and went to bed early. Thursday started the same way until I opened Instagram during my lunch break. That's when I saw it. His story showed him grinning at a blackjack table with stacks of chips in front of him. The caption read, "High Roller Weekend," with gambling and money emojis. The location tag showed a casino in Vegas. My blood turned cold as I stared at the screen, my sandwich forgotten on the table. I screenshot everything immediately. The next story showed him and his buddies at an expensive steakhouse, bottles of champagne on the table. Another showed the view from what looked like a luxury hotel suite. Each image felt like a punch to the gut. The timestamp confirmed these were posted just hours ago. My hands shook as I scrolled through more of his posts from the past day. Videos of him throwing dice at a craps table, laughing as he won big. Pictures of designer shopping bags from high-end stores on the strip. A selfie with some influencer I didn't recognize, both of them holding cocktails that probably cost more than most people's daily wages. The rage built slowly, then hit like a tsunami. This wasn't just about the money. This was about the lie, the manipulation, the complete disrespect for my trust and generosity. I had worried about his kids sleeping on the street while he was living it up in Sin City with money he stole from me under false pretenses. I called him immediately. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. His outgoing message was upbeat and casual, nothing like the desperate man who had begged for help 2 days earlier. I hung up and called again. Same result. My mind raced as I tried to process what had happened. Had there ever been an eviction notice? Was his landlord really threatening him, or was this entire story fabricated to fund his Vegas adventure? The more I thought about it, the more details didn't add up. He had mentioned being behind on rent for months, but just last month he had posted pictures of a new gaming setup that must have cost thousands. I spent the rest of my lunch break researching his landlord's contact information. It took some digging through property records and rental websites, but I found the management company that owned his apartment complex. Their website listed a main office number and an email for tenant concerns. Back at work, I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, I would check his Instagram again, watching new stories appear of his continued Vegas adventures. A video of him at a poker tournament. Pictures of room service that could feed a family for a week. Each post twisted the knife deeper. By 5 o'clock, I had made my decision. I drove straight home and opened my laptop. I composed a detailed email to his landlord, attaching all the screenshots I had taken throughout the day. I explained that I was his brother and had sent him $7,000 just 2 days ago specifically for rent after he claimed to be facing immediate eviction. I included the timestamps of his desperate text messages alongside the timestamps of his Vegas posts. The email was professional but direct. I told the landlord I thought they deserved to know where their tenants' priorities really lay, especially if he was genuinely behind on rent. I mentioned that as someone who had been financially deceived, I felt obligated to share this information with someone who might also be getting played. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Friday morning brought a response faster than I expected. The landlord thanked me for the information and confirmed that my brother was indeed 3 months behind on rent, owing nearly $8,000 total. They had issued multiple notices and were proceeding with eviction proceedings. The landlord seemed particularly frustrated to learn that the tenant had funds available for luxury vacations while claiming inability to pay rent. My brother's Instagram stories continued throughout Friday. More gambling, more expensive meals, more showing off. He was clearly having the time of his life, completely unaware that his world was about to crash down around him. The confrontation finally came Friday evening. He called me while I was making dinner, his voice slurred and celebratory. He told me about his incredible luck at the tables, how he had turned a few hundred into several thousand. When I asked him about the rent situation, he claimed everything was handled and thanked me again for helping out during their crisis. I asked him directly if he was in Vegas. There was a long pause before he started stumbling through an explanation about a last-minute work trip, how the company was paying for everything, how he would never lie to me about something so serious. The lies came so easily that I wondered how many times he had deceived me before. I told him I knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. I described the screenshots, the Instagram stories, the email to his landlord. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly a minute before he exploded into a mixture of anger and panic. He accused me of betraying family, of ruining his life over jealousy, of being unable to handle seeing him succeed for once. When he finally calmed down enough to listen, I explained how his actions had made me feel. The violation of trust cut deeper than any financial loss. I had genuinely worried about his children while he was living like a millionaire on my dime. The manipulation was calculated and cruel, taking advantage of my love for his family to fund his selfish desires. He tried to salvage the situation, promising to pay me back immediately from his winnings, claiming he had planned to surprise me with extra money on top of what he owed. But the damage was done. I told him about the landlord's response and hung up. Update 1. Monday morning brought chaos. My brother called me 17 times before I finally answered. His voice was completely different from the weekend, panicked, desperate, and completely sober. The landlord had served him with immediate eviction papers, citing his delinquent rent and evidence of financial dishonesty. He had until Wednesday to vacate the premises. His weekend of high rolling had apparently ended badly. After our phone call Friday night, he had gone on tilt at the poker table, losing most of his winnings and then some. He was flying back with less money than he had started with, and now faced the reality of his family being homeless because of his own choices. He begged me to call the landlord and explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that he really had been planning to pay rent with his Vegas winnings. When I refused, he accused me of destroying his children's lives out of spite. He couldn't seem to grasp that his own actions had created this situation. The calls continued throughout the day, alternating between rage and pleading. His wife called me too, crying as she described packing their belongings while trying to explain to the kids why they had to leave their home. I felt terrible for her and the children, but I also knew that enabling his behavior any further would only lead to more elaborate deceptions in the future. Tuesday brought a new development. My brother's wife called again, but this time her tone was different. She had apparently discovered that the Vegas trip wasn't his first deception. While going through their finances to figure out their next steps, she found evidence of other gambling debts and hidden spending. The rent money crisis wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of financial irresponsibility and lies. She thanked me for exposing the truth, even though the timing was devastating for their family. She explained that she had been working extra shifts for months, thinking they were struggling to make ends meet, while he had been secretly funding his gambling addiction. My intervention had forced everything into the open. Update 2. By Thursday, they had moved in with his wife's parents temporarily. My brother had stopped calling me directly, but I heard through family members that he was telling everyone I had ruined his life over jealousy and sibling rivalry. He was painting himself as the victim of my vindictive behavior, conveniently omitting the part about stealing $7,000 for a gambling bender. The family dynamics became complicated quickly. Some relatives believed his version of events, thinking I had overreacted and destroyed his housing situation out of spite. Others, particularly those who had lent him money in the past, started sharing their own stories of suspicious requests and convenient emergencies that coincided with his social media, showing expensive purchases or activities. My parents called for a family meeting the following weekend. They had heard conflicting stories and wanted to understand what had really happened. I brought printed copies of all the screenshots, the text message exchanges, and the timeline of events. Seeing everything laid out chronologically made the deception impossible to deny or minimize. The meeting was brutal. My brother arrived defensive and angry, but as the evidence mounted, his story fell apart completely. When confronted with the Instagram post's timestamp during his supposed housing crisis, he finally admitted to the Vegas trip but insisted he had planned to pay rent with his winnings. He claimed my interference had prevented him from fixing the situation. My parents were devastated to learn about the extent of his gambling and lying. They had helped him financially several times over the past year, always believing his stories about temporary setbacks and promising opportunities. The pattern was clear once everyone started comparing notes. Update 3. 3 weeks after the eviction, my brother entered a gambling addiction treatment program. His wife had given him an ultimatum: get help or lose his family permanently. The financial deception had destroyed her trust completely, but she was willing to work on rebuilding their relationship if he acknowledged his problem and committed to recovery. He called me from the treatment center, making what sounded like a genuine attempt at an apology. He admitted that the rent crisis had been manufactured to fund his gambling, acknowledging that he had manipulated my concern for his children to get money he knew I wouldn't give him for gambling. The remorse seemed real, but I had heard convincing apologies from him before. I told him I would consider rebuilding our relationship after he completed treatment and demonstrated genuine change over time. The $7,000 was gone, and I didn't expect to see it again. More importantly, my trust was shattered, and that would take much longer to rebuild than any financial debt could be repaid. His landlord actually reached out to thank me again. Apparently, my brother's case had prompted them to investigate other tenants who claimed financial hardship while their social media showed otherwise. They had discovered several similar situations and were implementing new policies for handling rent delinquency cases. The whole experience taught me painful lessons about enabling behavior and the difference between helping someone and being manipulated by them. I had always been proud of being the reliable brother, the one who could be counted on in emergencies. But I realized that my willingness to help without asking hard questions had actually enabled his irresponsible behavior for years. His wife and kids eventually found stable housing with assistance from her family and local support services. She filed for separation while he was in treatment, wanting space to figure out whether their marriage could survive the financial deception and gambling addiction. The children were resilient, adapting to their new living situation better than the adults had expected. 6 months later, my brother completed his treatment program and found a job with steady hours and direct deposit to an account his wife monitored. They started couples counseling and slowly began rebuilding their relationship. He hasn't asked me for money since the Vegas incident, and our conversations are cordial but cautious. The family relationships remain complicated. Some relatives still think I handled the situation too harshly, believing families should protect each other even when they make mistakes. Others appreciate that someone finally held him accountable for behavior that had been escalating for years. I learned to set boundaries I had never enforced before. When people ask for financial help now, I ask specific questions and verify their situations when possible. It feels cynical compared to my previous approach, but it also feels more sustainable and honest. The $7,000 represented more than money. It was a symbol of trust, family loyalty, and the assumption that desperation calls were genuine emergencies. Losing that money taught me that helping someone sometimes means refusing to enable their worst impulses, even when the immediate consequences seem harsh. Looking back, I don't regret exposing his deception to the landlord. His gambling addiction needed intervention, and his pattern of financial manipulation needed to stop. The eviction was devastating for his family in the short term, but it forced conversations and changes that might never have happened otherwise. The Instagram posts that triggered everything eventually disappeared from his account, but I kept the screenshots as a reminder of how easily someone can construct false narratives while living completely different realities. Social media had become his tool for both deception and inadvertent self-exposure. My emergency fund took over a year to rebuild, but the financial lesson was valuable too. I learned to distinguish between genuine emergencies and manufactured crises designed to trigger emotional responses. Real emergencies come with verifiable details and paper trails, not just desperate midnight text messages and emotional manipulation. The relationship with my brother continues evolving slowly. Trust, once broken so completely, requires consistent actions over extended time to rebuild. His recovery journey has shown genuine progress, but I remain cautiously optimistic rather than fully trusting. Some bridges, once burned, are never quite the same even after careful reconstruction.